Hello, my name is Sergei Kelley. I'm a college conservative student at Michigan State University, and this is my entry for Turning Point USA's 30 Under 30 speech. Leftism is the problem. It is a problem that we know of well in terms of policies, slogans, and their foolishness. But before we go further into this epidemic, may I say pandemic, of leftism, we must first realize what America is. Firstly, America was not an accident. It was very purposeful. We look at the writings of the founders, we look at what they said and how they felt, almost intervened by the divine creator, that this nation was, meant to be, even if it came out in the, craziest of circumstances and almost what seemed like an accident. But we look at how America has progressed since then, our track record on rights, preserving liberties, expanding liberties, and also expanding the reach of, democracy and world civility. We can see that this was no accident. For example, America has also had, for over 200 years, the same constitution. Your average country only has a 17-year-old constitution. Additionally, it has had stability like no other nations. Yes, especially this last summer, and we can see around election years it can get unstable, but compared to much of the world, it is still very, very stable. You can still live without relative fear of, having to move your whole property during an election year. Additionally, creativity. We hold 4% of the world's combination, but we have 90% of the patents combined from the other nations. Additionally, for prosperity, 4% of the world's population, our population has 25% of the world's GDP. Additionally, our 1% farmland could feed the rest of the world. And we produce a lot of food that is shipped in foreign aid and stuff like that. Furthermore, while half the world lives on less than $2 a day, most Americans are quite the opposite. And whether, people shout this as injustice or horrible stain, on us not supporting other people, we must realize that a lot of this prosperity is self-inclined. Americans are real ability to be resilient, work hard, and are the way our government is designed to be less of a burden, which often less government brings more prosperity. Furthermore, America's poverty our poverty line is much higher than the world's poverty line. We have a prosperous nation, and we have this through, protection of rights, the responsibilities of those rights, and the, supposed ability and limitation of the government, which has been trampled. Part of this problem that we don't really get taught, America's greatness, especially our track record, for example, on civil rights, from guns to voting, is we get taught a materialistic history. Remember, if you went to public school, remember back to those classes, especially primary, secondary, if you did it in college as well. Very often it's names, dates, times, number of troops, number of, battlefields, supplies, blah, blah, blah. But we don't get into, the intent. We don't, for example, sit down in American history class around the Revolutionary War and, ask ourselves, what was the prayer that George Washington prayed at Valley Forge? And what was his intent? And what did he hope to gain from the Creator in the upcoming battles? That would never happen, obviously, nowadays. Maybe 50 years ago, but now it does not happen. And this has had a disastrous effect and has been, heightened by the problem of leftism. More on that later. When we do get to this problem, we look at, this leftism problem, and we can kind of see, it seems surprising. It seems, wow, this, really, the last 50 years, maybe it's kind of come out of nowhere. But we must remember, whether you think it's a surprise or not, it is, as Lincoln has said, an approach of danger to be expected. For example, in his speech on the approach of danger to be expected, he said, "At what point is it then the approach of danger is to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and its finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time, or die by suicide." And then he finishes, "Upon these let the proud fabric of freedom rest, as the rock of its basis, and as truly as has been said of the only greater institution, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." He realized that America would only fall from the inside, from our own inadequacies, from an inward problem. Our might and our prosperity cannot be challenged by a foreign nation, and it has not successfully been, fortunately. And then we go into, what does what this fabric that Lincoln describes, what is that? And as Washington concluded his farewell address called An Experiment in Liberty, he said, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, the firmest props of duties of men and citizens." He realized, like many other founders, even if people like to go to the more what they would say left-leaning or atheistic founders, still pointed to morality, civility, decorum as indispensable supports, especially religion, whether they wholeheartedly agree with Protestant ethic or with other ethics of that day. But we must realize this proud fabric has been destroyed in many ways from shining sea, from the problem of leftism, which we're going to further. What is, besides the slogans, besides things we say AOC say, besides the policies, crazy policies, may it be banning fracking, all this stuff, cutting student loan debt. What is the real problem of leftism? What is the deeper underpinnings of leftism that those problems reach up into policy? We must look at this not from policy and then the deeper problem, but from the deeper problem and how that problem affects policy and where we get those slogans from. So first, it makes people their own god. Leftism says you are your own creator, you're your own finisher. It says you reign supreme over yourself. And while there are parts seems somewhat individualistic, you do you live your life. You realize the individual completely on their own is a disaster. They need to realize that they cannot do everything themselves. And must realize that if you are your own god, then you can decide your own faults and whatnot. And we have seen this have a horrible effect on mental health when people are told that it's all up to you, only you can do it, your feelings are more important than any values you can ever hold on to. And this has had a horrible effect on our younger population. It also tells us feelings, not values. If you go into some elementary schools or some leftism areas of this country, they see a lot of statements on believe in yourself, do what feels right. And we're often taught, especially in college, especially, very, leftist circles, orientation especially, it's always very driven about, you do you make your college experience. And realize if everything's dependent on feelings are just, they're temporary, they can change, they can depend on the situations, they're variable, they aren't hinged to, an absolute, which can be a problem because some people feel different things at different times and they can be objectively wrong or right. Just because you think objective morality doesn't exist does not make it not exist. Further, leftism teaches, humans are just a byproduct of evolution. We're just, we're, stage 5 billion and 3, in the process, and we're just an accident. And when you tell young kids, and especially if you don't tell them explicitly, but they kind of, just implicitly learn this process that, I'm just, another animal, just kind of came here, well, what do other animals do? They just live, whatever, need shelter, reproduce, blah, blah, blah. Really is a huge hamper to self-esteem, obviously, but also just tell somebody you're an accident. You're just another, animal on this planet. And we don't wonder, but we can understand where people can get this notion that, having babies aborted, in the hundreds of thousands, if it's done out of a situation where it's like, oh, well, if you understand humans are just an accident, you're just another animal, it makes sense to that crowd. And it makes sense in that terms of an argument. Obviously, it's not right, it's horribly wrong, but we must understand the problem here. First, and additionally, it strengthens our sin nature. Obviously, the things I just discussed are part of our sin nature, but it really does strengthen our sin nature because it tells us to act our own impulses, act as your own God, act as your own deity. And we can see, when people are told, you are the, ultimate agent of your life, you are the, you have all the answers. And we see depression, we see suicides, we see all this stuff go up when people are wholly dependent only on themselves. And they're not taught that there are external truths, absolute truths that their lives can matter on. And also it abysmally, promotes the collective over the individual, in terms of greater, great for the greater good type message. And this effect has been very horrible. As I mentioned before, with abortion and stuff like that, you can now get fined $100,000 for killing a newborn turtle, but abortion is celebrated by some parts of America. Obviously, by most of America and many parts of it, it's not celebrated, but by, main endorsers, it is celebrated. And we must remember always, especially this pandemic of leftism, which is rapidly spreading, and where will it be in 5 to 10 years? We don't know now, but hopefully it's lessened. And we must always remember that in honesty, decorum, to understand the full extent of leftism and the leftist points and how it has hurt our glorious nation. And it has befallen Europe. The pandemic of leftism has befallen Europe. It has decimated her, and must never allow it to happen to our shining city. Never.